Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make the perfect hexagon. Now a lot of these shapes all go under the guise of granny squares, but they come in all different shapes, and this one is a hexagon. Now it's not a granny stitch one, it's just a traditional UK treble crochet. That's a USA double crochet. It's really easy, and I'm going to give you a little tip where you can keep all your sections the same size. So this one is really easy to do. What I'm going to show you is this has got 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds. Now this one is done in cotton yarn. That's this, and it's much thinner. As you can see, it's much thinner than yarn. And I had to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds to get that to the same size. So if you use a thinner yarn, you'll need to do more rounds. If you use a thicker yarn, you can do less rounds, but it's up to you how big you make these. I've just used a UK double knitting yarn. This is just an odd ball of double knitting. You can use any yarn that you want for it, and you can do as many rounds as you want. But I'm going to show you how to make this perfect hexagon. You can use these, you can make blankets, you can make handbags, you can make hats, scarves, jackets, clothing. You can use them to cover cushions. You can use this for all sorts of things. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 big ones of these, and I'm going to make a bag with it as well. I'll do that in another video. Today I'm going to show you how to make the perfect hexagon. So to do a standard hexagon square, granny square, I mean even a hexagon gets called a granny square, even though it's not a square. They all fall under that category. But anyway, to do a hexagon crochet shape, I'm going to do a magic circle. Now you can chain 3 and join them into a little circle and do your work inside the chain, but I think a magic circle is so much easier because it pulls tighter. So put your yarn down your hand and wrap and cross over. Put your hook under that straight one and pull the crossover through. Pull the crossover through, then catch your working yarn and do a chain. I'm going to do 2 more chains, so that's 1 and 2. So that's a chain of 3. Now we're going to do a standard crochet stitch in this hexagon. In the UK, this is called a treble crochet, and if you're in the USA or another country, it might be a double crochet for you. So that chain counts as my first stitch. I'm going to yarn over and put 1 more in my magic circle, and I'm going to chain 2, 1, 2. Now we need 6 clusters because a hexagon has 6 points, so we need 6 clusters with 6 chains of 2. So that's my first one. That's the second one. Now put my chain of 2. So I've got 1 cluster and a chain of 2, 1 cluster and a chain of 2. And we need 6. That's 1, 2. And chain 2, 1, 2. So we're going to slip stitch into the top of this chain of 3, 1, 2, 3, and slip stitch through. So you should have 6 clusters and 6 sets of chain 2. Now what we're going to do is you're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Now each cluster is 2, and we should end up with 4 stitches in our next round, a chain of 2 and 4 stitches. So what you're going to do now is you've got that chain of 3 down here and a stitch. Right into where you put that chain, where you slip stitch, you're going to put another stitch. So you have your chain, which is your stitch number 1, and 1 into that same space. Now into the next stitch, it might have just sort of squished itself. Into the next stitch, put 1, and then into the chain space, put 1 stitch. So you should have 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. You chain 2, 1, 2. Into that same space, that chain space, put 1 stitch. Now, into each of these 2 stitches, you'll put 1. So 1 into the top of that stitch, and 1 into the top of that one. That gives us 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, and into that space, you'll put 1 more, and that makes 4. Each time you do a round, you'll add 2 stitches to each section. Chain 2, 1, 2. Now into the chain space, put 1 UK treble crochet. That's a double if you're in the USA. And 1 above that stitch, 1 above that stitch, 1 into the chain. You'll chain 2, put 1 into the chain, 1 into that stitch, 1 into that stitch, and 1 into the chain. You're going to do that all the way around. Now when you put your stitch in, make sure you go into that little space that's there, right above that stitch. So that's my second stitch, 1 into the top of the next one, and 1 into the chain space. Chain 2, 1, 2, 1 into the chain space, 1 into the top of that first stitch, 1 into the next stitch, and 1 into the chain space. That gives me 4, a little set of 4. Chain 2, and 1 into the chain space, 1 into the top of the next stitch, 1 into the top of the next stitch, and 1 into the chain space. Chain 2, 1, 2, 1 into the chain space, 1 into the top of the next stitch, 1 into the top of the next, and 1 into the chain space. Now what we're going to do is, only when we close the round, we're only going to chain 1. Chain 1 and then slip into the top of this chain of 3. Slip your hook through the stitch and slip stitch to close. Now the reason we only done 1 here when we close the round, when we do our chain, it's not in that chain space. So if we do a chain of 2, we'll end up with a bigger space. There's only 1 stitch in that chain space there. And if we do a chain of 2, you'll end up with a much bigger hole in here. And you want to keep these little holes the same size. So only do 1 chain and then close your round. You'll see what I mean. We're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Now this is the next round, and we should have 6 stitches in each section. We're going to go right into that very first stitch. That's my chain of 3. Now we're going back into the top of that stitch. So that gives us 2, the chain and a stitch. That's 2, 1 into the next stitch. That's 3. 1 into the next stitch, that's 4, 1 into the next stitch, that's 5, and 1 into the chain space, that's 6 stitches. So you'll see that on this chain we will only put 1 in when we get to the end, where these chain spaces have 2, but you only have 1 when you join, and that's why we only do 1 chain, is to keep that space there the same size as these spaces. So chain 2, put 1 into the chain space, and then 1 into these 4 stitches. 1, 1 into the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Then 1 into the chain space, that gives me 6 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now you're going to chain 2, we're going to make a little point, 1 into the chain space, then 1 into each of the 4 stitches along. Make sure you go in to that little stitch there that you can see that little loop. That's the top of that first stitch. Now I'm going quite slow so that all the beginners can learn how to do this too. So again we should have 6 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Chain 2. You always chain 2 except for in that very last one. So 1 into the stitches along, and you can make this hexagon as big as you want it. The most standard size has 4 rounds. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and my 6. Chain 2 and into the chain space, 1 stitch and 1 into each of the stitches along. One, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 1 into the chain space is 6. Chain 2, 1, 2. Put 1 into the chain space. So this is my last section. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 1 into the chain space makes 6. Now I'm only going to chain 1 because I'm going to join it. If you see what I mean, we've only got 1 stitch in this space here, and that's why I'm only going to chain 1, because we don't need such a big space. If you chain 2, you'll end up with a big gap in here because we've only got 1 stitch in filling it. Now that's a good tip for when you're doing a hexagonal. So we're going into the top of that stitch and pull through. And as you can see, these spaces are the same size as these ones. They're not big gaping holes. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3, into the very same stitch. Into that same stitch, put 1 stitch and 1 into each one along. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 1 into the chain space makes 8. So this round you'll have 8 in between your sections. You'll chain 2, 1, 2, 1 into the space, and then 1 into each stitch along. So put 1 into each of these 6 stitches along here, and 1 into the chain space, and you should have 8. And 1 into the chain space. So it's up to you how many rounds you do on this to the size that you need for your project. So chain 2 and go back into the chain space. That's your first stitch. 1 into the top of your next stitch, right in there. And the next one. And we should have 8 in this section when you're finished. Put 1 into the chain space and chain 2 and 1 into the chain space, and work your way along to that last stitch. So again, I'm at the joining point. So I've got 7 stitches. I'm going to put 1 into that chain space. That makes 8. And I'm only going to chain 1 because, and again, I've only got 1 stitch in that space. So I've done a chain 1, and I'm going to slip stitch to the top of this chain of 3. And as you can see, that keeps just doing a chain 1 here, keeps the holes the same size as the ones that are around my hexagon. And that is how you'll do a hexagon. You do as many rounds as you want. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And with this pattern, each round increases by 2 stitches. So we started with 2, then we've got 4, then we've got 6, and then we've got 8. Now I'm going to show you this one. Now I went up to 10. Look at the size of this. This one is 10 stitches because it's thinner yarn. This is a cotton yarn and it's much thinner. You can see how thin that is. If you use thin yarn, you'll need to do more rounds. If you use thick yarn, it'll be less rounds that you need to do. So this one's got 8 stitches. I've done 1. So this one's 4 rounds, and this one I had to do 5 to get it to that same size. And if you use thicker yarn, you need 4 rounds to get to this size. So it depends greatly on the yarn that you're using for the size that your hexagon is going to turn out. But this is a great way to get perfect hexagons, especially if you remember to only do 1 chain when you join into the next one. Now you can, if you want, do a chain of 3 and turn and then go into the chain space if you want. But I think when you do a hexagon, you get a much nicer shape in it when you only go around in the one direction. So thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you click on the bell icon, YouTube will tell you when I put up another tutorial. So until the next time, happy crafting, and I'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.